Hello everyone. In this video, we're gonna review midterm for RLS 100 Life, Leisure, and Pursuit of Happiness, and especially for those of you who took the evening session. So if you have taken a different session, morning session, for example, or the first session, this doesn't apply to you, so please watch the corresponding video. So this is some of the there are some of the statistics about results of the midterm exam, and these statistics are coming from 39 of you guys who took the evening session. The stats and average are pretty close between morning and evening, and as they are supposed to be. But this way you can see hopefully more accurately where you are in a class as opposed to just pulling everything in. So for multiple choice questions section, we had a 22 question. Each question was worth 1 point, which means 22 points, right? And average here is 16.41 out of 22, which means 74.59%. Yes. The standard deviation is 3.92. What that means is that basically within a 3.9 point range from the average, from the mean, right? 16.41. So somewhere between, what, 12.5 to 20 something. Majority of you're there. Okay. So in terms of feedback for multiple choice question, please revisit. When you can watch this video, you should be able to see actually exam link on eClass, not the SEM, right? Smart Exam Monitor, the blue icon, but actually like a typical quiz link for the midterm. You should be able to see them, and please go to the multiple choice link for the evening session, and you'll be able to see your answers, right answers, and what are the points of each question. Hopefully that helps. So in this video, we're going to focus on the second part, which is the written answer. There were 7 questions here, and each question had a little bit of different points, and a total of 19 points. Average here was 14.69, which is about 77.3%. It's pretty good, actually. Both very typical multiple choice short answer, good average, like typical years. But short answer is a little higher, which is understandable because you had more time this year, and also it was open book because of the COVID and all that kind of stuff. So that's totally fine. I'm glad that you probably went back and forth between study guide and the lecture notes and exam, which is the right thing to do. Again, the standard deviation is 3.62, basically same idea within a 3.2 points range from the mean. Majority of you are there. And in this video, we're going to provide some feedback, model answer, and some key points for each question. However, if you provided some answers and also you didn't get quite full mark, if you got a full mark, we're not going to just provide you feedback summary. I'm like, we're busy marking, so we're like, yeah, fantastic, full mark, move on. But if you get, like, for example, 0 point off or something like that, and then we're going to try to provide a quick feedback as to what was missing. So maybe you can also revisit the link, like the multiple choice link as well. And also, hopefully, some of the model answers and things like that, we're going to talk in a later part of this video as well. If you pull them together, multiple choice and written part, there's a 41 points in total, and average here is 31.10. That's 75.85%. Okay, so that's pretty good average. I mean, that's considering it's a COVID and all, I think we're doing great, and that's kudos to you. You did a good job. Standard deviation is about 7. That means from the average, 7 point below, 7 point above, most of you are there. Okay, and this is a grade breakdown. So you should know your grade through eClass, and from there you can actually see. So the top part is basically 100% to 95. Really upper 90%, and from there is lower 90%, upper 80%, lower 80%, and so on and so forth. So you can see, quite a lot of you guys actually pretty doing good, 80% or above. So that's very, very good, really good work, you guys. And from there are some, also some folks down there, And the last part, below 20.5, I highlighted it because that means below 50%, right? This does not automatically mean anything. This does not mean automatically you fail a course or something. Does not. However, we want to address this as soon as possible. So if you are in here, please reach out to me. Please reach out to me, all right? Email me. And we can set up a meeting, Google Meet or Zoom, and we can talk about it. We can talk about how you are prepared, what we could have done differently, and hopefully you can test out. We can test out some of those ideas through the weekly quizzes and weekly activity post, and then you will be much more better prepared for the final exam. Okay, sounds like a good plan. Actually, some of you guys actually did it. You reach out to me, and we, in terms of quiz mostly, and I took some of your notes. Actually, I saw your notes, and I provided you some advice in terms of how to take notes, how to use partial notes, and everything. I provided you some tips about how to prepare and go through their lecture notes and their things like that. Some of you actually found it positively, really helpful. And actually, some of you actually told me that your quiz score improved. So this may work for you too. So reach out to me, please. And this, of course, extends to everybody else, right? You didn't have to be in that category. Anyone in this course, in this class, totally, you have the opportunity, you have the right to just email me, okay? So if you're like, you're 80, you want to kind of try to push into 90, please tell me now rather than before final exam, okay? So for the rest of this video, we're going to go through the 7 short answer, written answer questions, and I'm going to provide some of the key points and their model answers, right? So written answer 1, identify and briefly describe 2 aspects of Hamilton and American musical, which we discussed in a lecture, as well as actually, well, yeah, that can be considered as representing social diversity and facilitating social changes. Don't list more than 2 points. So Hamilton, that was a theater, right? Opera theater for musical for social change. So that's one of the actual weekly activity that, e-class discussion forum thing we did. It wasn't necessarily about Hamilton, right? But we did it. So this is what I mean when I said that I will make written answers. These weekly activity posts are going to be fantastic opportunity for you to work on written answer. This is it. I'm going to make usually written answer question kind of related to the weekly activity. So they're really good opportunity for you. We're providing good feedback. Me and my TAs are providing a really good feedback, I think, through that too. So take advantage of that opportunity as well, okay? I know some of you did, which is great, but I know some of you didn't, right? So that's missed opportunity. Anyway, so here, model answer, based off of the lecture notes actually. First, it utilized musical culture like rap music, hip hop music that are coming from certain, known minority racial ethnic group, such as African American, Latinx people, things like that. That's one of the characteristics of Hamilton. Another point is that this Hamilton casted non-white actors for the white characters. I mean, they were historical figure. They were white, Caucasian, based on a historical fact. But they casted a non-white actor. There are more diversity in it too. So these are 2 major points, right? 2 model answers, example answers. Of course, you don't necessarily have to be this, but it has to be related to Hamilton specifically. It has to be logical. And if you have any questions, let me know about that too. Written answer 2. Explain the concept of conspicuous leisure, which was a key concept we discussed in the class. Then discuss how this concept applies and does not apply to today's phenomena of influencers on social media. So that's pretty interesting. So first part is very straightforward. It's just a definition, explanation, right? The second part, I'm pushing you a little more to the application. Okay, that's tough. Now let's see. So the first part, pretty straightforward, and you don't have to be this extensive. I said it in the last part. You don't have to be this extensive, but the bolded part is very important. So let's go. According to Tostin Vebren, so he was the person who created this concept called conspicuous leisure. It is a leisure practice done by the rich people, mostly those in a medieval Europe, right? It's kind of coming from the history chapter. They hosted expensive gatherings for many people, like a lot of alcohols, entertainment, games, and all that, which did not have any apparent economic benefits for the rich people who are organizing. So that got Weber and go like, why, right? And Weber argued that conspicuous leisure, they did this to gain and maintain social and cultural status. That's the key. That was the ultimate goal. By showing off how much wealth, the money, and power they had. Okay. The key here is that first part was to gain and maintain a social and cultural status, reputation, and all that. Capital. No, not the economic capital, but social cultural capital. If you only mention the showing off part, you're not going to get the full mark. Why? Because that was obvious. That was obvious to Vebren. That was obvious to anybody else that, hey, those rich people are showing off their money. But the why? That was the question that Vebren, the key question, critical question that the Vebren asked and answered, tried to answer. And a conspicuous leisure, the concept of it, really speaks to that reason. Okay, so that's the important part. Okay. In terms of second B part, so in terms of relationship with the influencer, so that's fun part and that's the tough part. That's the application part. So conspicuous leisure fits today's influencer in a sense that they influencers do show off, right? They do show off their extravagant leisure life, food, entertainment, travel to exotic area to other people through social media. Arguably, it's more effective because it's faster with the technology, and you can reach out to many more people. So that's great. Now that's the part that it applies and it makes sense. The part it doesn't make sense is this. And if you really understand the concept of conspicuous leisure, you should be able to tell this. However, influencers are also fundamentally different from the lows in the medieval area, as they do so, as in show off things as part of their career. That's their work, that's their career, and they make money off of it. That was not the case for the lows, was it? Right? The Vebren got had to ask the question because there's no apparent economic benefit to that, to the low people. So that's the key difference. And if you really, really get that this conspicuous leisure and the history behind it too, then you go like, yeah, that's different. Written answer 3. So this one is about, this is a good one. Choose 2 out of the historical times that we learn in a chapter 5 about history. Now you are writing a short time travel advertisement to invite people from one of the chosen, one of the 2 you chose, to go to the other one that you chose. For example, I might write an ad for people in the Industrial Revolution era to visit ancient Greece, or vice versa, flip it. You can do that too. So now, 2 things. A, do you feel like you saw this question somewhere else besides the midterm? Yes. It's very similar to one of the weekly activities that we did, the discussion forums, right? So again, let's do it. When I say I make a write-up, this is a great opportunity for you to prepare for written part of the exam. I mean, I make exam question based off of that because I think you engaged with those things. You should benefit. Some of you mentioned that, hey, Shin, you should give us the points to these weekly activity posts because we're spending some time to it. Yes, I am actually giving you points through these written answers. Okay, so it's indirect, yes, of course, but there are benefits to you too. So let's do that. B is that if you, well, actually some of you, a few of you, jump to assume that, oh, this is exactly the same as a weekly activity. No, the weekly activity was today's people traveling back to historical time you chose, right? Here you're choosing 2 historical time, from one to the other, people are time traveling, not from today. So that's a key difference. So even though you feel like, Shin is basing his question based on a weekly activity, please do not assume, just don't jump, but read the question carefully, right? So now two questions, two parts. Write a short ad advertisement with at least two main historical facts about leisure and destination time period, wherever people are going to. B, logically explain why you think this advertisement would be appealing to the people who are basically time traveling, right, based on their life, the departure time. Okay, so of course there are so many possibilities for you guys, and I was amazed by like how creative you are, and also logical, but creative. Like you make really interesting combination. So I'm not going to be able to talk about everything, of course, and you should be able to see the feedback if you didn't get the full mark on your e-class. Now for the A part, right? For the destination, you have to, in the ad, you have to mention two leisure-related main facts. That's a keyword in the exam question, right? Main facts. So if you only talk about, for example, ancient Rome and mass leisure, and you're just basically giving example about mass leisure, that's well, the example. I mean, everything is basically about mass leisure, right? Got to give me like something else, like maybe hedonic thing or something else, probably. All right. So two main facts. That's the key. But most of you really got it right, actually. Vast majority of you guys. And also, it should be written as a travel ad, of course, because that's what the question asked for. Most of you, again, fine here, but some of you just wrote sentences and paragraph, and that's not the travel ad. So you didn't get this point. For the B part about the destination, you have to show correct understanding of the leisure and pretty much life, right? For example, in the case of Industrial Revolution, you talked about work life, how work and life were divided. Work was really mundane and repetitive and dehumanizing. That's good. That's good too. And the departure side. And I have to make a logical connection between the two periods, I would say, in the departure side and the destination side. And mostly, oftentimes that logical connection meant either opposite. For example, in the industrial liberation side, work was so demanding. There's not much time for leisure. Then there's like, for example, Islam had a really relaxation and, a lot of very calming and luxurious leisure. It's polar opposite, so that the people in this industrial revolution area would definitely feel, the Islam leisure to be very attractive. That makes sense. Or similarity. Some of you creatively talked about, oh, these two historical time share a very fundamental key leisure value. So they should feel like, hey, that seems to be something that we like, actually. So that's another way to go about it. So there's a really good example, good ways. Okay. So once again, this question was about people traveling from one historical time to the other. So if you talked about, how today's people are going to find it attractive, well, sorry, but that's not going to give you the points. Written answer 4. Bowery and Rogenbach and Patterson and Hammett, 2 studies found somewhat contradictory findings regarding people's experience and view of a solitude in wilderness experiences. I think that's chapter 2, 3. Yeah, 2. Yes. The textbook changes the chapter number. So two sub-questions. A, describe how their findings can be considered as contradictory to each other. And B, provide one logical point that can reconcile the contradiction. By reconcile contradiction, I mean basically that explain this is really not a contradiction. Maybe okay, what's that point? Okay, then 2 points question. So for the first contradiction part, really you're describing two study, and you can go deeper. But if you did this, you should have got the full mark 1 point here. Basically, Bowery and Rogenbach found that the recreationists experienced a high level and increasing level of solitude throughout their wellness experiences. Remember, they measure actually 3 times: entry, immersion, and exit, right? Throughout increasing tendency. Now, Patterson and Hammett found that the recreationists experienced more encounters, interpersonal encounter, which is the opposite of solitude, than expected, and perceived these encounters as beneficial, like a good thing for the quality of their wilderness experiences. So that's the part that's contradictory, because Patterson and Hammett basically suggested that no, it wasn't the solitude, it was the encounter that was important. versus Borean and Rogenbach. No, that was a solitude. So that's the contradictory part, right? Now, you could go further deeper into it, which is great, but this should be enough. Now, B, what's the point that could logical point that help us understand this is not actually contradiction? Maybe. Remember, key fact is that Borean and Rogenbach measured 3 times, right? Entry, immersion, and exit. But Patterson and Hammett did not. So maybe this is because Patterson and Hammett only measured recreationist experience and views, right, of the encounters and all after their visits are done, like they're about to leave where they left. Borean and Rogenbach found that the social acceptance dropped during immersion, wilderness experience, but increased toward exit from the wilderness area. So maybe it's that although people don't prefer and value encounters during the wilderness visit, immersion period of time, but maybe retrospectively in hindsight, when they're done and look back, encounters are valued. They cherish those random conversations and all, right? At that point, those two studies are actually kind of supporting each other. They're consistent to each other. Okay, so that basically how the study was conducted was a really key thing. And if you remember Borean and Rogenbach, and you can check the lecture notes, there's a table and there are 3 stages in a multiple data collection, which was not the case for Patterson and Hammett. Written answer 5, some of the characteristics of culture we learn in chapter 6. Chapter 6, culture, very important. It's shared, learned, integrated, and symbolic. And of course, we had a dynamic as well, but of course, I'm intentionally putting that dynamic outside of here, so you cannot talk about dynamic here. I choose 3 of these 4 characteristics and then briefly explain what each means. That's very straightforward, right? And then describe leisure-related example to demonstrate each characteristic. Well, that's what we did in chapter 6. So I think this is pretty straightforward. So I'm going to go through pretty quick. Shared is the first characteristic. What that means is that values and standards of a behavior in a given culture are held in common, but that does not mean that it's the same, like we have the same values and standards. No, obviously we don't have the same standards in Canadian society, so that cannot be true. That wouldn't give you a point, right? An example here is that, for example, many Canadians, right, tends to value being physically active by doing exercise during free time. Yes, we do, many of us. Maybe we're not doing it, but we still think that it's a good thing. We know it's a good thing, right, at least. Yes, it has to be leisure related, this example is, okay? If you're talking about work, for example, it was leisure related, that was in the question, then please speak to the question. Second characteristic, culture is learned. And what that means is that culture is passed down from one member to another member by living it, by doing it, actually. Culture is socially inherited. It's basically, social, it's socially transmitted and communicated. The one example is that the children in Canada, for example, many children at least, learns how to skate on ice, right? By playing at ice hockey or figure skating, or maybe some sort of like basically living it. But that's not the case, actually. In Japan, for example, I can barely stand on ice, right? That's very culture specific. I'm giving another example of an immigrant here, which is actually another great example here. It doesn't have to be generation from parents to children. It can be, immigrants and newcomers too. But you can only provide, and you should provide only one example. I'm just giving you to give you more ideas here, okay? Integrated is a third characteristic. What that means is that all aspects of a culture are interrelated, intertwined, and thus change in one side causes a change in another side, right? Culture is kind of very complex and multifaceted, and they're intertwined. Example we discussed in a lecture was the end of the Cold War in the Soviet Union and the collapse of its economic, communist economic and political system resulted in very unexpected stuff. Ice hockey, again, sorry, well, it's Canada, so let's talk a little bit about ice hockey more. The loss we watched a short, introduction to the documentary, which was about the loss of extremely well-disciplined and trained, team-based, pass-based, rather than, I don't know, it's not dribble. I don't know really terminology about ice hockey, but it was a beautiful, very unique hockey, ice hockey of the Soviet Union national team. It was called Red Army, right? There's documentary. So seemingly unrelated. I mean, you should have been able to keep that hockey culture, although the entire economic and culture, political system are, collapsing, but they were obviously intertwined deeply. So change in one cause change or actually loss in another. The last fourth is a symbolic, is the cultural, the last aspect of a culture. And of course, you don't have to talk about the full. I mean, you shouldn't be actually talk about all of them, right? You were asked to choose 3 out of 4, okay? So if you chose symbolic, what that means is that cultural understanding requires symbol. You need a symbols in a given culture to understand whatever, let's say, Canadian culture. And a culture is expressed also, not just understanding, but then expressed, output through the symbols as well. What would it be the example? Leisure related example. One of the things that we talked about in a lecture is drawing and painting, arts, right? It's a culture expressed through symbols in a leisure context. I talked about research, cross-cultural research, suggesting that East Asian cultures use different symbols, such as higher horizons, bird eye view, like it looks like you're bird and just looking down, everything. Then the Western cultures, where people tend to use something like a perspective, right? Something close to you is bigger, and something close to you is bigger, something far away from you is kind of smaller, although the object has the same size. Lower horizon line, things like that, in landscape paintings. So this could be example as well. So that was written answer 5. Written answer 6. And you go like, hey, you saw this name, Abba Maiga, right? From chapter 6, right? Oh, 6? Yeah. And we actually talked about this in a weekly activity, discussion forum again too. So I took out that description per se, right? It's in a textbook, it's in the lecture notes, it's in everywhere. So you don't need that again. I took that out. So there's a description, right? It was about the, Abba Maiga was living in this part of the African community, and there were people have a mud house, house buildings built out of mud actually. And it was part of World Heritage Site. And because of that, he couldn't actually update his house. He couldn't have a shower. He couldn't have so many things, tiles and floors and all that basic stuff that we consider basic, right? Modernity. They couldn't modernize. Now they feel like they're just, tourists are gawking, staring at them. They come and just take a look at it because this is World Heritage, right? So 3 things I ask you to do here. Discuss one advantage of the World Heritage Site program based on this story. And here's a catch. One of the culture change concepts. So that's the new part. I'm kind of challenging you whether you can actually make that logical connection between some of the concepts we talked about in this chapter 6. B is discuss one disadvantage of World Heritage Site program based on the description, but make sure that your discussion is based on this description, but goes deeper than what's already said. I'm going to get to that actually, okay? And this is actually what I said in the message right after chapter 6 weekly activity was marked, right? Marked or provided, given with the feedback. I sent you guys a message, and this is exactly what I said, because I thought it was important. Now, C, propose any logical base theory solution to minimize the identified disadvantage, which is B, while maintaining the advantage in A. Okay, so that there has to be some connection there. Again, you can take it anywhere, any direction, and you did, which is great, but A is pretty much standard because you have to talk about one of the cultural change concept, which is here, cultural loss. Okay, if you remember some of diffusion, innovation, and all that, cultural loss was one of those cultural change concepts. So World Heritage Site Program protects and preserves some vulnerable cultures and it prevents them from experiencing cultural loss and basically disappearing from the earth, right? Because we think that that's valuable. So that you have to mention cultural loss. Yeah, that's the specific concept you have to mention. And the rest, you cannot say, for example, oh, it facilitates, it helps cultural loss. No, 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 that's the opposite. It prevents cultural loss, okay? And that's the one mark. Now, B, disadvantage, anything logical, but it has to be more than what's already said in the description. For example, you cannot say that, oh, it was a lack of modernity. They didn't have these, shower, tile, floor, door, those things, basic stuff. It was very inconvenient. That's already said in the description. Oh, the tourists will come and take a look, work them. That's already said in the description as well. So now here is a key that I already told you in a message before the exam based on a weekly activity. In a university question exams, typically, and for the most part, you can assume, you cannot rephrase what's already in the question to get a points because that answer is already in the question. That doesn't make sense. We're not testing, right? So you have to provide more than what's written in the question. For sure, you can assume that. Okay. So the model answer here is about the power imbalance regarding keeping certain culture. Here, the Abbas culture, the mud house culture, for the sake of tourists who are mostly from the Western culture, developed, with the money, and then those are the people who would travel so much distance, so much going through so much trouble to see that mud house, right? So the power that those local people don't really have a control over anymore at the house, but that's not sufficient because that's already discussed in the description. But we are basically, there are two groups involved, and two major groups: the Abbas local people and a tourist. Tourists don't even live here; they just visit sometimes, occasionally, just maybe once a life. But we're basically, considering and respecting their rights to take a look at this culture. It's their rights to take a look at this culture, right? It's not really these local people. I mean, these local people know this culture, live this culture, really. And they want a modernity now, but we're not respecting their voice and rights to the modernity and modern leisure, by the way, too, but we're basically prioritizing the most of the, quote unquote, Western tourists who have more money and power and voice. Now, that's a big ethical issue, which is obviously related to the description, but it goes deeper than that. When I say message like that, that means something is important as well. Now, C, anything logical. Really, this word is anything logical that minimizes the disadvantage. So it has to be related to the B part, okay? While maintaining the advantage. So, okay, most of you did a good job here, but few people propose some idea like, oh, let them modernize everything. Well, then the cultural loss will happen, right? So it has to be some sort of compromise, right? So you wouldn't get the full mark if you said, oh, let them modernize. That's not logical. That's not what's asked here. The last question, written answer 7. Identify one case of racial discrimination in a leisure context that was publicly reported through media. Briefly describe the case in terms of A, which racial minority groups were involved. B, what leisure context was it? And it was. And there's C, what discrimination happened exactly. Also copy the link to the media coverage. I'm just trying to be like, it's exam, so you cannot make it up. Now, if you notice, again, well, what we talked about things, this actually recognition issue in the chapter 4, I think. We did one of the weekly activity actually about that. It was not publicly reported per se. You could have talked about publicly reported case. And the study guide had almost exactly same this in the study guide, okay? And if you think about what's important in this society, I'm trying to also, as an instructor, I want you to think about something important happening right now. You should be able to deduce that and expect that I will ask something related to this. But anyway, A, specific racial, racial minority, like some of you talked about African, Black Canadian, African Canadian, Indigenous people in Canada, Asian Canadian, whatever that might be, that's fine. Gotta be specific though. Specific leisure context. Okay, you cannot just say leisure or recreation because that's again in the question already. You gotta be more than that. For example, basketball, going to the fishing or going to the hotel and going to the pool or something like that. It's a specific. C, specific discrimination or injustices. Again, you cannot just say racism or racial profiling or stereotyping. That's not enough. It's basically the same level as discrimination, injustice. Got to give me a little more than that. For example, somebody was stopped by police at a gunpoint, or the worst case scenario was they were killed, for example, for no reason, basically wrong reason. That's specific, right? That's very specific. D, link. Okay, very straightforward. Okay, so I hope this one is pretty straightforward, and most of you did a really good job as well. So I'm very happy with that. So this is the end of the year midterm review. And if you have any question, let me know. And I will give you guys a little more time. I know you're busy. I know it's COVID. I'll probably give you some time. I will let you know by when. If you have any questions or concerns, like you want me to take a look at the exam, specific question, gotta be specific. And also with the specific reason. Like I think this part is, maybe worth the partial mark or something. I'll do that. But I'll give you some time because I think we can use some time right now. Okay, bye now.